friends of BookBytes. It's Heritage Month, or should I say Heritage Weekend? And boy, have I got such an amazing celebration of our heritage lined up for this evening. Many of us have remembered fondly of the wonderful writer Chris van Wyk, who is no longer with us, but who has left a legacy of magic in his writing. We remember the more political, sobering poetry in the form of a very well-known poem called In Detention, in which he really highlighted the horrors of apartheid in so many of his works of the time. You'll remember the award-winning and award shortlisted memoir Shirley Goodness and Mercy. I had the pleasure of listening to Mr. Van Wyk speaking at the Josie Book Fair just over a decade ago. And this is the kind of legacy that really makes for our celebration of Heritage Month. This evening, I have none other than Kevin van Wyk, who has written Chris van Wyk, Irascible Genius, son's memoir. Kevin van Wyk has his own, accolades to his name. He's a well-known attorney. Been a legal advisor in the corporate field, and he's recently written and brought into the public domain the memory and the honor of his father. It's amazing to have this opportunity to have read the books in tandem, and of course to welcome Kevin online this evening on BookBytes. Kevin, it's wonderful to have this opportunity to chat to you, and welcome to BookBytes this evening.
Good evening, Shafinaaz. Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't know if I'm a well-known attorney, but I'll take it. But yeah, no, that's basically my profession. I'm an in-house advisor these days, and yeah, in the last couple of years, I started trying my hand at writing. So this is my first go at it, but I think it was an important journey and something that I probably had to do. But yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting with you this evening.
Well, we are speaking about the legacy of the great late Chris van Wyk, so you definitely form part of that in more ways than one. And we're very happy to be able to celebrate his legacy with you this evening. Let's talk about writing memoir. The vulnerability it takes both to write memoir, having that understanding that you're drawing on this legacy, but writing your own story through your eyes. I'd love to hear about your process. Where did it begin for you? And what was it like, reaching into the past and relearning and remembering?
Geez, it's a very good question, and obviously I've been asked it in different iterations in terms of how it came about. But mine has been very interesting. I was thinking about it today. I've always been very fascinated by the past and by history, and how we've come to be and how life has come about. And obviously, those thoughts have been quite emphasized in my mind ever since my father passed away 10 years ago, almost to the week. He passed away on the 3rd of October 2014. And after he died, obviously there was an immense sense of loss and longing for him. And perhaps the old cliche goes that you don't know what you've had until you've lost it. I don't think it was so much a case of that for me because I think I appreciated him during the time that he was with us. But what happened was, after I'd delivered the eulogy at his funeral, there were so many other stories that I remembered about him over the ensuing days and weeks after his death, and I felt I felt a bit nar with myself that I couldn't express that, at the eulogy. But then I realized there's just too many memories, and I don't want to let it all go to waste. Um, and then I just started. I must say, it wasn't immediate. I toyed with the idea of doing a lot of things. I thought of doing a blog online. I thought of writing letters to my father, posthumously. And then my mom passed away about 2 years after he died. So those thoughts kind of took a back seat because I had to deal with my mom's death. I'd become a father when my father died, and when my mother died, I had my second daughter. So a lot of things was happening in my personal life. And then about 2 years after my mom died, these thoughts kept itching inside my brain, and I thought to myself, let me start writing them down. Otherwise, I'm going to forget them. So I started writing down these little bits of memories of my father and mother. And as I was doing it, it dawned on me more and more what influence they had on my life. And then I thought, let me expand on it. And I think COVID was the perfect time because work sort of stopped for a little while, and then I started getting more into the writing process. And the memories that came flooding back to me were just so vivid. And people often say to me, "How do you remember all these things?" And I think that I remember them because they had such a big effect on my life and who the person I'd become. So I kept writing these longer little paragraphs and chapters about my parents. And in doing so, it was just an absolutely fascinating and mostly joyful journey. It was really sad. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm sure I've done a little bit of research, and you were a writer in your own right, Shafinaaz. And I'm sure you know the process of writing is that as you delve into one memory, it kind of unlocks another one and another one. It becomes more and more vivid in your mind, and that's what happened to me. And I just started writing. It took me around about just over 2 years to finish the initial draft of the manuscript. And yeah, it took me about after 100 pages, I realized that the book was taking shape, and that's sort of how it evolved from late 2019 until around 2022 when I finished the first draft of the manuscript.
I'm always fascinated by the process and the magic of memoir. Having appreciation for just how much it takes of you and how much comes through the writer through the process. So let's talk about. I mean, we can talk, on end about Chris van Wyk, the legacy, the writer, and how much he's contributed, and we will get to him. But let's talk about Chris, the dad. He's obviously was so influential in so many aspects of your political thinking, your social thinking. And talk to us about the inside. Who was he? What was he like?
Um, yeah, we have about 25 minutes, but I could go on forever about him. So he was he was an ordinary father, if there is such a thing. A very loving man. Some of my earliest memories of being alive is prominently in the picture because I actually, and this will strike a chord with you in particular, because I remember being about 4 years old and where I grew up in Reveille. I think two or three times a week the Reveille library would be open till I think 8:30 in the evening. So there would be like an evening session, and he would take me there every week to get books, and we would take the walk from my grandmother's house where we were living at the time, and go and collect a couple of books. But in doing so, we'd first sit down and sort of choose books together. So that was probably the beginning of the journey of getting me to read and understand and enjoy storytelling. And he never did it aggressively or anything like that. It was always very very subtle. Um, and he also, as you know, he had a famous sense of humor. So he was a very witty man. Um, he liked using puns. He was quick witted and he was always there with a joke. But he also and obviously the title of the book Irascible, which is a very unusual and odd word to use. Many people ask me, why did I use that? And it's not a word I was familiar with up until maybe a decade or so ago. And it was a word I picked up because it meant basically someone with a short fuse. And I felt that it described my father to some degree. But I've also in the book I've tried to use it in a humorous way because a lot of his moments of temper tantrums were funny and not serious. But there were times when it was serious, and I think that was due to his principledness and his activism. So I've seen him, and from a young age, he instilled in me this humanism and political awareness of what was going on in the country. Because, and I think in some ways it was unique for me in that regard because I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I was growing up in a family of political activists. And slowly but surely, him and my mom would mention things to me that would, over time, make me aware that something was wrong in the country. So he was a loving, ordinary man, but in doing so, in little steps, he was making me aware of things and teaching me ever so slightly every single day. And you only kind of realize it as you get older. But obviously, I'm grateful for it, and it's culminated in me paying tribute to him in the form of this book.
Yeah, and I mean, peppered throughout the book is a strong sense of, teachings on race and identity. And so we talk about his political activism, the political activism of both of your mom and your dad being very prominent. But there's also this where he stands up to bullies, whether he's standing up to bullies in the classroom. You have very early experience you talk about in one of your examples of a very disappointing manipulative adult in the form of one of your teachers, but also later on in Northcliffe, I loved that, you could relate the incident where he just said, I'm sorry, but this is not on. This is not going to happen. He tells this woman to her face. We've, as brown people, we've all had those experiences in our faces, and sometimes you're just so sort of go into freeze mode. Here is Chris van Wyk saying it like it is because of who he is, a non-racial racialist from the very get-go. Talk to us about some of those examples, those strong examples of saying, this ends here. This is not going to happen on my watch.
Yeah, I'll give you. There are so many examples. The book could have been double the size. Now, one of the things, as I said and as you mentioned, my father wasn't shy to express himself. Where he wasn't happy with how someone was being treated or how something was playing out in front of him. And I actually remember because, like you mentioned, he wrote Shirley Goodness and Mercy, which became quite a well-known memoir when it was published 2004. And one of his quirky outbursts happened actually about 3 years later when the book was made into a play. So there was a play done initially at the Baxter Theatre in Cape Town, and then it subsequently came to the Market Theatre in Joburg. And I actually remember one evening, it became very prominent and well known, and a lot of so-called colored people went to see it because it was something familiar to them and something that they could relate to. And it was after one of the shows, and people came up to congratulate him and ask him to sign the books, etc. And there was a lady, I don't remember who the lady was, except to say that she was a colored lady, which is important for purposes of the story. And she said to my father, "Oh, thank you, Chris. That was such a lovely story. You really showed our culture. But I don't know why you put the toying in there because that's not our culture." And my father kind of just said, "Well, it was me. It was me." Um, and she quickly just walked away, not expecting my father to snap a little bit. But I think that, I mean, he didn't go crazy or anything, but just that firm rejection of that. I've written a story about us, but I've also written a story about. I've demonstrated that I was an activist and proud to be so, because I think unfortunately during apartheid, many people who were suffering under it were
Mm.
quiet and just accepted the status quo. And my father wasn't willing to do that at all. And then there was another incident, but this was many years ago. It's not in the book, but it's something I actually thought about a couple of weeks ago. We were staying in Reveille at the time, and we had and this was before the fancy days of DSTV. We had an outside aerial, so it was that big aerial that so you could catch SABC and Bob TV, etc. And one of his buddies had a business where they fixed the outside aerial. So he sent two of his guys to come and help my father with the outside aerial, but they actually messed it up. They bent some of the wires, and then my father chased them away and said, "Go get the part that you're supposed to get and come and fix it again." And my father's buddy filmed my father laughing, and my father said, "What's so funny?" So he said, "No, my guys came to get the part to fix the outside aerial, but they said to me, 'Hey, boss, please don't send me back to that man's house. When he gets cross, he shouts us with big words.'" And yeah, that was just that was my father. So it was the funny and the serious, but like I said, he was principled, and he just if something was wrong, he made it known. And yes, he definitely stood up to bullies, as I demonstrated in the memoir.
There's so many heartwarming, charming, and in some ways terrifying ordeals that you speak of in this memoir. And I'm glad you brought up. I mean, I think to some degree, while there were many activists, it wasn't that easy from within, our brown communities, the Indian and colored communities as well. There was an element of self-preservation, which got people saying, "Well, don't hang out with that crowd; they're the troublemakers or whatever." So some of
Mhm.
that also, comes through and needs to be spoken about because it wasn't easy to be an activist at a time when opposing a regime that was unfair to people.
Mhm.
We speak about, okay, we've got this intimate portrayal of Chris van Wyk, the dad. Now the storyteller of Rivoli, as he's lovingly known to many of us. His poetry was very political. There's anger, there's a strong worldness, but his storytelling ability is so magical that it reverberates for anyone who's ever read any of his works, and his style of speaking and relaying a story. He's also one of the pioneer publishers, independent publishers, where he had Rebel Press. Can you speak to us a little bit about that? His process of what would it have been at the time? It's so much easier now with Instagram and all of that to sort of get your work out there. What were the processes like for him? Would you have insight on that? Tell us more about setting up these publishing houses and what kind of traction work would have had back then.
Geez, yeah, I think I know that initially back in the late 70s, if I'm not mistaken, he started a little magazine called Witty, but it only lasted a couple of issues. It was him and a very close friend of his called Faisal Janasi. Um, I saw Faisal a few years ago when I handed him a copy of a poetry book that we had recently published of my dad. It was about in 2020, I think it was, at the height of the pandemic. So he was definitely trying to be pioneering and trying to speak about the injustices and issues like black consciousness and identity and that kind of thing. And then he eventually ended up in Raven Press, editing staff writer, which was also quite a progressive liberal magazine, that gave voices to people whose voices were otherwise suppressed. So it was an interesting time because it wasn't so fashionable to do these things. And I
Yeah.
think I mentioned in the book that with my mother as well, because they started courting in the 70s, and many of the brown folks around said they warned her against dating him because he was this, political guy. So yeah, it wasn't it was a bit controversial. But my mother embraced the ideology, and she saw that things were wrong, and she embraced what he was doing, and she joined the activist circle. And yeah, so he went against the grain, but in a way he couldn't care less, because if he believed that what he was doing was right, then he went for it, all the way. And you were chatting about the today you have Instagram and social media and that kind of thing. And during my father's writing career and time, obviously those things were not available to him. In fact, I remember him writing his work literally by with a pen and a paper.
Mm.
These piles of paper spread all over the place. I don't know how he kind of kept track of it, but I think that was a lot to do with my mother. She was the organizer. She kept things neat. She would type out his work onto the typewriter. I'm talking now back in the 80s. When we moved into our house, he initially had a typewriter, which my father, he typed with his two index fingers very, very slowly, although he sped up over time. And I was chatting to someone the other day about Shirley Goodness and Mercy in particular, which became, somewhat of a bestseller. I can't remember exactly how many copies it sold, but it was well over 50 years. I think it was up to 70,000 or something. And he did it without Facebook or Instagram. It was just a book that so many people could relate to. It was so universal. And whether you were from South Africa or even other parts of the world, there were aspects of it that many, many people could relate to. And I think it just spread by word of mouth. And I'll tell you a quick story, actually, that I only found out literally last week. I was I was with a colleague of mine, um, and she was chatting about my book because she had just gotten a copy of the book, and she was telling me that she remembers reading my father's book, Shirley Goodness and Mercy, and she said she was on holiday, and she picked up a copy of Shirley Goodness and Mercy at a second-hand bookshop in Bali, Indonesia. Um, And I was like, what, in Bali? She said, yeah, there was a second-hand bookshop. I saw it there, I recognized it because I heard a lot about it, and I read it in Indonesia. And I thought to myself, well, that's a nice story because my father's voice has kind of traveled the world, it seems, um, which is yeah, which obviously made me quite proud. And yeah, it's just I think the book just struck a chord with people that no other work he had done before did. So I was obviously immensely proud at what he was able to achieve.
I think giving visibility to a community that hadn't had much of a voice at the time was really the power of it, but also the authenticity. To be able to read a story that just draws on raw emotion and just the way you see the world and the purity, that kind of innocence, writing from an adult perspective is a very unique kind of trait. I haven't read, is it Chickens to Hatch?
Oh,
Eggs to lay, chickens to hatch.
yes, yes, yes.
So when I was thinking about this week while preparing for the interview, I said I'm reviewing, rereading Shirley Goodness and Mercy, and then reading Irascible Genius. And for me, they fit together. I think definitely, Irascible Genius can be read as a standalone. But it was so amazing to be able to make those connections, to join those dots, that I want to go out and find a copy of the In Between and sort of have that. But like a poem like In Detention just takes me back to the 90s when I was in high school and we were doing it. We had an English teacher of Scottish descent, so she was far more progressive, and for her, this was like the poetry you had to concentrate on. And I thought that more of our young readers need to be reading the poetry of Chris van Wyk to really get a pure sense of what it was about and what he was about. Let's talk about corporal punishment. There's so many instances in the book, and reading it from a generation where, like, I matriculated in the 90s, but our new generation is not aware of just what it meant to survive under those circumstances. We can laugh about it now, but those were very scary times. I know of lots of high schoolers who didn't finish high school because of a very erratic, perhaps violent principal or teacher who just didn't let them get past certain stages. And corporal punishment had a lot to do with it. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. You say that we laugh about it. I don't. We laugh about it because I mean it's something that we kind of survived. It was something that was ubiquitous at the time. When you chat to youngsters these days and you tell them, the kind of punishments that were meted out to us, they're a bit shocked and confused. It's like, but why would they do that? If when I tell my kids, every now and again because I often tell them bedtime stories. They're still young. They're 8 and 10 now. So I've read parts of Shirley Goodness and Mercy to them, the safe parts, I think. Um, and they learn about these horrible teachers, and I've also had a few stories, about horrible teachers, and I don't know, I don't know why there's so many people, unfortunately, that romanticize the notion that it made us stronger or tougher. I certainly think it built character, but I don't think it was not in a good sense. I think my character could have been just as well built in a more humane way. But it just shows you what was accepted at the time. I mean, we were living under the auspices of apartheid, and this is what the police was doing, legal or illegal. My father was, as you know, he was arrested and beaten up by the police on a few occasions. And it's so strange when you think about it now because it was kind of the status quo. But it seems like all that was happening in the country from a leadership point of view was just cascading down to every facet of life, whether it was in schools and in homes and that kind of thing. Um, I'd like to think that my two daughters are very well behaved, but corporal punishment is not a practice I do in my house, and they are exceptionally well behaved. But there's just other means to get it done. But yeah, it is a theme, and I think it came through strongly particularly my father's work, because believe it or not, it was even worse back in when he was at school. And there was the horrific story about Mr. Kelly beating him up, giving him 100 cuts for something very innocuous. I can't remember the incident, but yeah, it was something that we kind of had to live through. And look, I've survived it. I've dealt with a few horrible teachers in my time, and I think one of the more prominent stories in my book of corporal punishment. Fortunately, I wasn't the victim, but my father had to witness another boy being beaten up in his presence. So yeah, it's so strange, and yeah, I'm glad it's something that's obviously outlawed, but I think we could still go a long way to improving things, especially in the treatment of you know people, women, and children, that kind of thing. So it's still pervasive in our society, violence, but hopefully we're going in the right direction.
I certainly hope so. And I think memoir allows us to document those memories and those experiences, but also to reflect on a better way forward, hopefully. I
Yes.
really enjoyed both in Shirley Goodness and Mercy and in Irascible Genius how both Chris and yourself highlight the influence of your mother, each of your mothers. Obviously, your dad also has this influence of of your mom, his beloved. So the talk of Shirley and Kathy as strong, prominent figures, as influential figures, really, really came through for me so powerfully. So, I mean, congratulations on successfully carrying and bringing that through as well.
No, thanks a lot. I'm glad it came through because I I was a little hesitant in the sense that, with the title of the book and everything, it would seem like it was solely about my father, and obviously it's about both my parents. My father's obviously the title character, and he was the prominent, celebrity, if you like, for lack of a better term. But yeah, I'm glad it came through because my mother was just as important, if not more so. And yeah, when my mom died, I often say to people, it was painful when both my parents died. Obviously, it affected me greatly, but losing a mother was a different kind of pain. It just hit me so hard, and yeah, so I'm glad that the tribute and what I could do, came through clearly because I think my mother deserves as much credit as my father. And yeah, my mother was great, and my mother and Shirley, her mom-in-law, they were actually very, very good friends and very close. So it's nice that they could share that, and I could see, the product of having really good mothers. So yeah, having a great granny and a great mom was really something that I'm fortunate to have had.
I think it's so beautiful that you were held by this amount of love in sometimes uncertain circumstances, and that you were generous enough to share that with us. Kevin, it was such a wonderful opportunity to chat to you this evening. Thank you so much for your time. We wish you everything of the best as this book gains traction. I know that whoever picks up a copy will be really enjoying this, but more importantly, you've done us so much of value in bringing the storyteller of Rivoli back into the contemporary literary domain. And I know that everybody is going to be picking up copies. I hope that there's copies of Shirley Goodness and Mercy making itself out into bookstores as well, because I have no doubt whoever reads Irascible Genius is going to want to reread and revisit works of Chris van Wyk. Thank you once again so much for your time and for the value that you've given us.
No, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. If I could get people to read my father's work as well, even those that haven't heard of him, I think they would absolutely love it.
Well, it's Heritage Month, and we are absolutely delighted that we were able to celebrate with you the value and the heritage of our very own storyteller of Rivoli, Chris van Wyk. And with that, we wish you everything of the best for the rest of the weekend.
Thank you very much, Shafinaaz, and you too.
And so we heard from Kevin van Wyk about his memoir as as the son of Chris van Wyk. And I hope that people will be picking up copies, enjoying the story, and really getting value from this beautiful narrative. And that's it from us this weekend on Book Bites. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.